All right, Module 10, Part 2B, this is language. Let's have some fun with this. This has to do with dialects and some of the language components. So let's just have some fun. First of all, language determines how we see the world. It filters our reality. It lets us know what's going on. It tells us, literally, what, what we need to know in our surroundings. Language is not the same as grammar. It's not the use of good or bad language. It's the use of the the an expression of our needs and how it is that we can communicate with one another. Some of the examples I like to use or like to share on this PowerPoint are some contemporary expressions. It's almost funny to hear my mom use words like, "Oh, she unfriended me," on Facebook. And when my mom will write on Facebook, on her Facebook wall, and write LOL, it's just cute because she's picked up on some of the needs of today in order to communicate with one another via the medium of social media. But words like cake pops or text me or safe sex and smartphone, those are all contemporary words that weren't a part of our vernacular years ago. I asked this question, what's the color of this blouse? Or is it a shirt? Or is it a top? Or is it a shift? And depending on where the person is coming from, that will determine what color they think it is. Some will say mauve, some will say purple, some will say tan. And some will say, but it's not a shirt, it's a top, or it's a shift and not a blouse. So much of that is dependent on where we come from, our region, in our context. One of the examples I also like to share is something that happened in my classroom. I was talking about my daughter's billfold being stolen. And after class, one of my students said, "What is a billfold?" And then her cohorts joined in like, "What are you talking about?" And a billfold is a wallet, but back in the Midwest, we oftentimes talk about a billfold and like literally folding bills as instead of the term wallet, just because it's one of those vernacular colloquial isms from that region. This is a fun one. I like to ask this question, what is this? And out here, most people are going to say a soda. But this next screen will show where people use various terminology for this bottle. Generic names for soft drinks. You can see pop is quite prevalent in the north. We've got the soda down here in the south. We have the word Coke. I remember being in Arkansas and they asked me if I wanted a Coke. And I said, yes, I'd like a Diet Coke. And they brought me a Diet Pepsi. And I was like, no, 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 I want a Diet Coke. And they said, well, this is it. This is a Diet Coke. And when my son said also that, yes, he'd like a Coke, they said, well, what kind? And he said, well, I'd like a Coke. And there was a confusion then. And finally I said, he wants a Sprite. And so they, of course, then brought him a Sprite. But from their perspective, when they talked about Coke, it was much like us saying, do you want a soda? And then we'd have to clarify exactly what type of soda we want. Accents have to do with how we pronounce different words or the accents from our region. So in the next slide, there are 3 different YouTube videos that I'd like you to watch that have different American and foreign accents. And I want to be sure that you know that there's no one accent is not better or worse, but I want you to be very aware of some of the visceral feelings you have about the accents. What makes you go wow and what makes you go whoa? And I'm not offended if you find the Midwest accent to be less than desirable. Sometimes students are afraid to say that because I am from the Midwest, and as you've become quite aware, I do have the hard vowels and I do have the Midwest accent. But And if you find that undesirable, I'm really sorry that you've been listening to me now for the past 14 weeks. Anyway, but we have regional and foreign accents, reiterating the fact that one accent is not better or worse than others. The next slides are looking at nonverbal and gestures, and we have different meanings depending on where we come from some of these gestures. Here's one. In America, this gesture means what? Yeah, take a look at what it means in other countries. So we say, hey, awesome. Other countries say, yeah, up yours. Yikes. What about the bottom of feet? What about the bottom of feet? What does that mean? Well, in our country it's like, well, okay, it's the bottom of your foot. No real meaning. But in other countries, it can be dirty, like mooning, derogatory, so we don't show the bottom of our feet. Kind of important to note. When we give this sign, in what does it mean? Well, in our country, it might mean victory or peace. Woohoo! In others, it can mean very different. Very different. How about this one? Okay, perfect. And in the Middle East and in Turkey, not so perfect. How about the handshake? As you've learned from some of our religious leaders, shaking hands, male to female, we need to be very cautious, and that can be from various countries. We shake hands, but the male to female can be very needs to be handled delicately. Find out if that is okay by the culture that you're reaching your hand out to. A pointed finger. We say, go there, or hey you. It might be rude in a number of other countries, so it's best to use an open hand for pointing or giving direction. In this country, what does this mean? Well, yeah, rock on. In African cultures, it's a curse, and in other cultures, it can mean your wife is cheating on you, you have an unfaithful partner. A pat on the head. Aw, we say, oh, and pat, pat, pat on the head. Might be in fondness. In some religions, it can be highly invasive, meaning that the spirit exists in the head. How about this one? Oh, talk to the hand. Stop! In other countries, this can be a very serious offense, like rubbing poop on the face. How about this one? Come here, right? Come here. Some countries it's suitable only for dogs, and in others you can even be arrested. Entertaining? A little. Necessary? Be sure to know your audience.